Hello everyone, in today's tutorial we're going to be showing you how to make a simple pencil pleat curtain. So you'll see we've got the pencil pleat header which is formed using the header tape, and then these also have a mitered corners for a really professional finish.
So this tutorial is just a really simple way to make a pencil pleat curtain. It's not how we would make our curtains in our workroom because we've got more machines like a blind hemmer and that sort of thing, but if you're making curtains for yourself at home, this is a really great method, especially if you've never done any curtain making before. So we've chosen our face fabric and also our lining fabric, and today we're going to be making a curtain that measures 140 centimetres, so that will be the finished drop of our curtain. As we're only doing one width in the curtain, we don't need to worry about pattern repeat or anything like that, so we'll just be adding 20 centimetres onto the finished drop. If you do need to join more widths together or you need to consider the pattern repeat, then check out our video on pattern matching.
You will need some lining fabric, the face fabric of your choice, pencil pleat header tape in your chosen depth, some pins, tape measure, scissors, and also an iron. Turning up the hem by 8 centimetres and pressing this seam in place. Work your way along the width of the fabric, making sure that it measures 8 centimetres all the way across, and then again pressing it into place. Once you've done your first fold, we're going to turn the hem over again. Just double check that that's still measuring the 8 centimetres, and again press this into place. This is going to form a really nice, neat hem on our curtains and give them a really professional finish. Once you've finished ironing and you're happy that the double folded hem is measuring 8 centimetres, then you can pin this hem in place. Make sure you're pinning in the opposite direction to which you'll be sewing. We'll be repeating the same process with our lining fabric, but first of all we need to trim it down a bit so that we get returns on the edge seams, and that also the hem of the lining hangs a little bit shorter than the hem of the face fabric. It's only necessary to trim down the lining if your face fabric and lining fabric are the same width. We're going to measure in from the selvage edge by 16 centimetres and trim away this excess fabric. You want to make sure that this line is nice and straight and the 16 centimetres that you're trimming off is even all the way down the side of the curtain, so we don't get any wibbly wobbly or wonky edges. Then we'll move down to the hem of the lining, and from this edge you're going to cut away 4 centimetres. This will mean that the lining hangs the perfect length compared to the face fabric and sits just shy of the length of the face fabric. Again, you want to make sure this cut is nice and straight. I like to do the cut and fold method to create a straight edge, but if you prefer, you can measure 4 centimetres all the way along and mark that with a pen or a chalk pencil. Once you've finished trimming down the lining, then you can begin to turn up the hem just as you did with the face fabric. So measuring 8 centimetres and pressing that hem in place and working your way across the width of the lining, repeating this process. Once the first fold is complete, then you can fold over your lining again, check that it's measuring 8 centimetres and then press that into place. You can then pin this seam in place. As I mentioned before, it's always good to pin in the opposite direction to you'll be sewing, or on the diagonal like I am here. This just prevents any movement while you're stitching up your hem. We're now going to sew this hem in place. So I just like to line up the edge of my foot so that you get a nice neat line all the way across the hem, because this obviously will be visible from the front of the curtain, so it's really important to keep it as tidy as possible. If you prefer, you could also hand stitch this hem. It just takes a little bit more time and care, but it does mean that you can't see any of the stitching from the front of your fabric. For the purpose of this tutorial, we'll just be showing you how to machine sew. You can then repeat the process and stitch up your lining. If you want to have a really smart finish, then don't forget to change over the colour of your thread when stitching your lining. The next step is to sew up the side seams of your curtains. So you want to line up the edge of your lining with the edge of your fabric and line it up to where the print or the embroidery finishes on the fabric. Don't take it all the way up to the selvage, otherwise you might have visible selvages on the back of your curtains. So line that up tidily, make sure the top of your lining and the top of your face fabric is also in line, and then we're going to pin those in place. Making sure that the top is perfectly in line means that the hems will line up perfectly, with the lining being slightly shorter than the face fabric. You can then sew this pinned seam together fabric. Make sure you continue sewing all the way to the very bottom of the hem of your lining fabric. We are now going to prepare to sew the other side seam of your curtain. So as you will see, the lining is going to look narrower than your face fabric. Don't panic, this is correct because it's going to create the returns on your curtains. Just pull that lining fabric across until it lines up as it did with the first side, so lining up the edge of the lining with the selvage of your face fabric, and then pin that in place. Again, it's really important that you're lined up perfectly at the top of the curtain in order to create that staggered hem at the bottom, so that the lining hangs slightly shorter than the face fabric. You can then take your curtain over to the machine and begin sewing up the second side of your curtain. Once you've finished sewing both of your sides, we're going to press down that seam towards the lining. This will give a nice tidy finish on the front of your curtains. So just to repeat that again, we're pressing the seam towards the lining. The next step is to get the curtain ready for sewing on your header tape. So you're going to match up your side seams of the curtain fabric and then create a fold to find the midpoint on your face fabric. Mark that midpoint either with a pen or, like I am here, with a small snip in the fabric. Then you need to repeat this process with the lining side of the fabric. So again, make sure those seams are perfectly lined up, find your midpoint on the lining, and then either mark that centre point or give it a little snip. Then open out the curtain the opposite way, and you're going to line up those marks or the snips, just as I am here. Then pin that centre point in place to prevent any movement. You're then going to lie the curtain flat and press where we're going to sew this top seam at the very top of your curtain. You'll see where my left hand is that the return of the fabric is already starting to form there. This is the perfect point to make sure that we're going to be sewing our curtains to the exact length you require. So we're making a curtain that's 1.40 m in length. So measuring up from our hem, we're going to mark 140 centimetres. Where we're marking is going to be where we're stitching to create the perfect length curtain for our project. As I'm going along, I'm also popping in some pins to hold this perfectly in place so that nothing moves while I'm stitching. Once you've marked your way across the entire width of your curtain, you can bring your fabric over to the machine and stitch along the line that you've just created using your pen. If you don't feel confident following notches that are created with the pen, then you can always take a ruler and join all these together to create a solid line. Make sure you sew entirely across the width of the curtain, so from the very edge to the very edge. This will overlap the stitching of the side seam, as you can see here, creating a X in the corner of your curtain. Once you've finished sewing this seam, you can remove all of the pins from the header and turn your curtain the correct way out. It's really important to get all the way up into those corners and make sure they're pushed out so they're nice and square. It's also at this point that I like to lie the curtain flat and give it a really good press. Take your time to line up the lining and the top of the curtain perfectly. Make sure it's nice and square. It's really important for the finish of your curtain, so just take a little bit of extra time here. As you can see, we're now really close to finishing the curtain. We just need to pop on the header tape and also finish the hems. Now you're going to start off removing the string slightly from the header tape so that you've got an area where you can begin to draw up the header tape once it's sewn into place. Tuck under the raw edge of the header tape and then pin it in place at the very top of your curtain. Then work your way across the width of the curtain, pinning the header tape in place and keeping it nicely in line with the top of the curtain. Don't forget to make sure that the pockets of the header tape are facing the outside before attaching the tape. You can then sew the header tape in place, starting on the top edge as you can see here. What's really handy about our 3-inch header tape is it actually has stitch lines for you to follow, so it just makes the job that little bit simpler. Once you've finished sewing the top side of the header tape, you can repeat the process and sew the bottom side. Just bear in mind that we're leaving the edge, as you can see here where the strings are hanging over, open. Do not stitch over this end. The last finishing touch is to do the mitered corners on the hem edge of your curtain. So to do this, all you need to do is flip the curtain over so you're seeing the lining side, work your way down to the hem and just tuck in that raw edge of the face fabric as shown. I like to hand stitch the mitered hem in place, so I'm really careful not to go all the way through to the front of the face fabric, but just loop it into the hems. Then the stitching will be invisible from the front and you'll have a really professionally finished curtain. Don't forget to knot off your stitching because you definitely don't want it coming undone. We're now ready to gather up our curtains. So first of all, and the most important job, don't forget to knot off the end of your header tape strings before you begin pulling. Otherwise those cords are going to pull straight through. So always make sure you knot off the end before you begin gathering. Once you've knotted off the one end, you can move across to the other side of the curtain where we left the strings free earlier and begin to gather up the curtain to your desired length. Keep working those pleats across. They don't need to be too tidy yet. First of all, we'll gather it up to our desired length, tie off the end, and then you begin to work the pleats to make sure that they're nice and tidy. So as you'll see here, I've reached the desired length that I want the gathered curtain to measure, and I'm tying it off so that those gathers can't become loose and flatten back off. The beauty of pencil pleat curtains is they're adjustable, so don't cut these off because you may want to alter the curtains at some point if you move house, let them out a little bit or perhaps gather them a bit tighter. And that's why we left that open end, because then you can just tuck the strings tidily away. I'm then going to begin working my way across the width of the curtain and just try and get these pleats lined up as neatly as possible and as evenly as possible across the width of the curtain. It's really worth taking your time here because dressing your curtains makes all the difference, and it gives a really beautiful finish. The final step is to pop in your curtain hooks ready for hanging. Now you normally get a ring every 10 centimetres on a curtain poles. You will need the same amount of hooks as you will rings. Similar with a track, you get the same amount of gliders, normally a glider every 10 centimetres, so you'll need the same amount of hooks as you do gliders. Then you're going to spread these evenly across the width of the curtain. Make sure that you're popping them on the same pocket so that your curtain hangs evenly. And congratulations, that is your finished curtain. If you've enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe for more tutorials, sewing tips and handy fabric information.